I want to bring in our legal panel here. Avery Friedman, a civil rights attorney and law professor in Cleveland, and Richard Herman, a New York criminal defense attorney and law professor, joining us from Las Vegas. Good to see both of you.
Hi, Frederick.
So then, Richard, in your view, there's no way that domestic terrorism charges could be pursued. Why not? When there is precedence of domestic terrorism, you think of the scale of Oklahoma City,
Right.
bombing. I mean, clear-cut domestic terrorism. Why is this complicated as it pertains to domestic terrorism laws either existing or not on the federal level?
Well, with the highest level of respect, Fred, the Oklahoma bombing was not brought under domestic terrorism charges. It was not. And that's because, as Avery said, they don't exist. They only exist for an enumerated list of groups, about 60 groups, mostly Islamic terrorists. And if you don't fall in that category, Fred, cannot bring charges. Now, having said that, that's under domestic terrorism. But, you have second-degree murder here. You're going to have hate crimes. You're going to have civil rights charges brought against him. You have mauling. I mean, the man will die in prison. There's no question about it. So just because technically you can't bring domestic terrorism charges, let's not get all up in arms over that. The legislature, Congress may modify to include this type of hate group or groups, but as we sit here today, it's impossible to bring domestic terrorism charges against this individual for the Charlotte acts, unless after the car crash he stood up and said, I did this for Islam. Then you could have done it. But he didn't do that. Can't do it, Fred.
And so, Richard, while he faces the second-degree murder charges on a local level, will that be simultaneous to how the DOJ moves forward or investigates what federal charges it would be able to impose against him? Or does it have to come after the local charges are resolved?
No, Fred. In fact, most likely the state will defer to the federal charges that are brought against him and let the feds go first, because they're going to bring civil rights charges and hate crime statute charges against him. I mean, they're going to throw the book at this individual. And Avery was trying to get a little creative there, but as we know the domestic terrorism statute as it exists today, those charges will not be brought against this individual. But, Fred, as we watch today what's going on live on television, the crowds look bigger than the inauguration charges. Crowds, Fred. And I got to tell you, the president was just an abomination this week. There are no fine people walking with racists and Nazis. None. It's such an embarrassment, Fred. It just, every week, it just doesn't. It's exhausting, Fred.
It had nothing to do with the law, though.
Because there is no law for these charges.
We'll leave it right
Fred,
there.
To answer your question, if there's a conspiracy by this group to violate the civil rights, criminals can be charged, and they will be.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Avery, Richard. Always good to see you. Appreciate it.
See you too.